Selena didn't wear perfume to smell nice. She wore it to disappear. For 3 years, she doused herself in synthetic rose, a chemical poison that burned her skin and blinded the nose of every wolf who walked into her bar. She thought she was invisible. She thought she was safe. But she forgot one thing. The alpha of alphas doesn't hunt with his nose. He hunts with his soul. And when King Malik walked in, he didn't smell the perfume. He tasted the queen hiding underneath. Chapter 1. Fire. That's what it felt like. Not a warm, cozy hearth fire, but a chemical burn eating straight through her skin. Selena gripped the porcelain sink, her knuckles turning bone white. She stared into the cracked, dirty mirror of the club's bathroom, gasping for air. The bottle of synthetic rose sat on the ledge like a little glass grenade. She hated it. She hated the pink liquid inside. She hated the way it smelled like dead flowers and bleach, but she needed it. She squeezed her eyes shut. Don't think about the north. Don't think about the cages. She grabbed the bottle again. Her hand trembled. Psst, psst. The spray hit her neck. Ah, she hissed through her teeth. The liquid sizzled against her pulse point, scorching the sensitive skin. Tears pricked her eyes, blurring her vision. It hurt. It always hurt. The chemicals were designed to strip away natural oils, the only thing strong enough to kill her scent. To kill the sweet, addictive smell of wild honey and winter air. That was her curse. So, she burned herself. Every hour. On the hour. She leaned closer to the mirror. The woman staring back looked tired, dark circles under her eyes. A stained apron. 23 years old, going on 80. You are nobody, she whispered to her reflection. You are invisible. You are safe. The door behind her creaked open. Selena froze. Her heart hammered against her ribs, thump, 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 like a trapped bird. She capped the perfume and shoved it deep into her apron pocket before turning. Hey, Selena? Boss wants you back at the bar. Place is packing out. It was just Tina. Another waitress. Human. Clueless. Selena let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Coming, she rasped. She cleared her throat, forcing a plastic smile onto her face. Just fixing my makeup. Tina wrinkled her nose. Ugh, you went heavy on the rose stuff again, huh? Smells like a funeral home in here. Better than smelling like old beer? Selena deflected, brushing past her. She pushed out of the bathroom and straight into the wall of noise. The club The Underground was a beast of its own. The bass vibrated in the floorboards, shaking her bones. Red and purple lights cut through the smoke, flashing over sweaty bodies grinding against each other. It smelled of cheap cologne, spilled vodka, and desperation. Perfect. It was the only place chaotic enough to hide a wolf. Here, she was just another bartender mixing drinks for the dregs of the city. With every step toward the bar, she kept her head down, shoulders hunched, eyes on the floor. That was the rule. Never look an alpha in the eye. Never draw attention. She slipped behind the sticky wooden counter. Vodka tonic! A man yelled, slamming his hand on the wood. Selena didn't flinch. She grabbed a glass. Ice, vodka, tonic, lime, slide. Whiskey, neat, glass, pour, slide. She moved on autopilot. Her body knew the rhythm, but her mind was miles away, constantly scanning the exits, checking the shadows. A prickle crawled up the back of her neck. A warning. Her wolf, the tiny, terrified creature inside her soul, whimpered. Danger. Selena paused, a bottle of gin hovering over a glass. She sniffed the air. Nothing but sweat and smoke and that awful rose perfume choking her own nose. Stop it, she muttered to herself. You're safe. Nobody looks for a silver omega in a dump like this. But the feeling didn't go away. She wiped her hands on her apron. Beneath the counter, taped to the underside of the well, was her silver knife. She brushed her fingers against the hilt just to feel the cold metal. It was a bartender's tool, officially. But for her? It was the only thing standing between her and a fate worse than death. The front door of the club didn't just open. It exploded inward against the wall with a crack that sounded like a gunshot. The music didn't stop, but the energy in the room shifted. It curdled. People stopped dancing. The laughter died. Selena looked up. She shouldn't have. She should have run to the back exit. But fear has a way of freezing you in place. She saw them. 5 men. Dressed in dark, expensive suits that cost more than this entire building. They moved like predators entering a pen of sheep. and in the center, her world tilted. He was huge, taller than the others, broad shoulders that blocked out the neon lights. He didn't look around with curiosity. He looked around with boredom. His eyes were dark, scanning the crowd not for a drink, but for a throat to rip out. King Malik, the alpha of alphas, the Iron King. Selena stopped breathing. Her blood turned to ice. Why was he here? Had the North Alpha sent him? Did he know? His head snapped toward the bar. Selena dropped below the counter, her hands shaking so hard the glass she was holding rattled against the wood. Please no, please no, please no. She pressed her hand over her mouth to stifle a whimper. The smell of the rose perfume was suffocating now, a thick cloud of chemicals. Would it be enough? Could it hide the treasure in her veins from the most powerful hunter in the world? She squeezed her eyes shut, praying to a moon she hadn't seen in 3 years. Make me invisible.
The wind up here was cold enough to freeze the breath in a man's lungs. Malik didn't feel it. He stood on the edge of the rooftop, 40 stories up, looking down at the city. It was a sprawling mess of lights and shadows, a concrete jungle where rats scurried and wolves pretended to be men. He felt nothing but a dull, aching boredom. "My king," a voice crackled in his earpiece. "We have eyes on the target. Sector 4. Malik tapped the device in his ear. "Is he moving?" "Stationary. He's in a basement club, the underground." Malik sighed. A rogue terrorist. A beta wolf who thought planting silver bombs in playgrounds was a political statement. Malik had been tracking him for 3 days. Not for sport, not for glory. It was his job. Being the alpha of alphas wasn't about sitting on a throne. It was about taking out the trash that threatened the peace. He hated the city. It smelled of gasoline and lies. "I'm going in," Malik said. His voice was a low rumble, deeper than the traffic noise below. "We have a tactical team ready to breach." "No," Malik cut him off. "I'll do it myself." He stepped off the ledge. For a second, he was weightless. Gravity grabbed him, pulling him down toward the alleyway below. He didn't panic. He shifted his weight, landing in a crouch on the fire escape 3 floors down, the metal groaning under the impact of his muscle and bone. He moved fast, a blur of shadow. When his boots hit the pavement, he was already moving toward the club entrance. The scent hit him first: stale beer, unwashed bodies, fear, and something else. Malik flared his nostrils. He caught the scent of the rogue rotten meat and sulfur. He was close, but underneath that, there was a chemical stench. Sharp, artificial, like someone had set a bouquet of plastic roses on fire. It was annoying. It made his nose itch. The guards at the door tried to stop him. "Hey buddy, private." Malik didn't break stride. He simply let his eyes flash. Gold. Pure, molten gold. The wolf flared in his gaze, a silent command that triggered a primal instinct in every living creature. "Submit." The bouncer choked on his words and stepped back, trembling. Malik kicked the door open. The noise assaulted him. The music was trash, a repetitive electronic thumping that sounded like a headache. He walked in, his elite guard falling into formation behind him. They were good soldiers, lethal and silent, but Malik was the storm. With every step he took, the crowd parted. He could smell their terror. It rolled off them in waves. Good. Fear kept them in line. Fear kept the peace. He scanned the room, his vision sharpened, cutting through the strobe lights. "Where is the rogue?" "Sweep the perimeter," Malik ordered, his voice low but cutting through the bass. "Find the back exits. Nobody leaves." His guards dispersed, melting into the shadows. Malik stood alone in the center of the chaos. He needed to wait. The rogue was a coward. He would bolt the moment he sensed the trap. Malik just needed to be the anvil, the hammer struck against. He needed a drink. He turned toward the bar. It was a long, sticky slab of wood manned by a few terrified humans. He walked over, his heavy boots thudding against the floor. Sitting at the bar gave him a vantage point of the entire room. He could see the door. He could see the crowd. A bartender popped up from behind the counter. It was a girl. Small. Fragile. She was shaking so hard he could hear her teeth clicking together. Malik frowned. He was used to people fearing him, but this was different. She looked like a rabbit who had just realized the hawk was already diving, and the smell, that chemical stench intensified. It was coming from her. She was drenched in it. It was offensive. It burned the back of his throat. Why would anyone wear something so vile? "Whiskey," he ordered. He didn't look at her face. He watched the reflection in the mirror behind the bar, scanning the room for his target. She didn't move. Malik's patience, already thin, snapped. He turned his head, locking eyes with her. She was pale. Her eyes were wide, dark, and terrified, but there was something in them, a spark of defiance buried under the panic. I said, Malik growled, his voice dropping an octave. Whiskey. She grabbed a bottle. Her hands were trembling violently. The glass clinked against the tumbler. Clink, clink, clink. She poured. Liquid splashed over the rim, wasted. She slid the drink toward him, keeping her head down, refusing to meet his gaze again. Malik reached out. His large hand engulfed the glass. He brought it to his lips, ready to burn away the taste of the city. He froze. The glass hovered an inch from his mouth. The chemical smell, the synthetic rose. It shifted. Just for a second, it was like a crack in a dam, a tiny, microscopic fissure in the wall of stench she had built around herself. Something drifted through. Time stood still. It wasn't the whiskey. It wasn't the club. It was wild honey. Sweet, thick, warm honey. And crisp, cold, winter air. His wolf slammed against his rib cage. Hard. Malik's heart stopped, then started again, beating a war drum against his sternum. Thump, 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 thump. He inhaled sharply, deeply. The chemical burn stung his nose, but he pushed past it, hunting that single, impossible note. It was there, faint, buried, but undeniable. His grip on the glass tightened until the crystal groaned. It couldn't be. He looked at the girl, really looked at her. She wasn't just a bartender. The trembling wasn't just fear. He set the glass down, slowly, deliberately. He reached across the bar. The girl gasped and tried to pull back, but he was faster. He was a king. He grabbed her wrist. Her skin was soft, warm, and electric. Sparks, literal sparks, shot up his arm, frying his nerves, making his vision blur with heat. He saw her eyes go wide, violet. For a split second, her eyes weren't brown. They were silver. Malik growled, a sound that didn't belong in a human city, a sound that belonged in the ancient forests. You, he breathed, the words scraping out of his throat. She wasn't a human. She wasn't a beta. She was something the world thought was extinct, and she was hiding right under his nose. You can't hide from me, he whispered, his voice dark with a hunger he hadn't felt in 100 years. Little wolf. He tightened his grip. He wasn't letting go. Not tonight. Not ever. The hunt for the rogue was over. The hunt for the queen had just begun.
He touched her, and the world ended. The heat from his hand seared through her skin, melting the ice in her veins. It wasn't pain. It was power, a jolt of pure, raw energy that slammed into her chest and made her knees buckle. Mate! The words screamed in her head. Her wolf woke up. It didn't just wake up. It howled. It clawed at her insides, desperate to get to him, desperate to submit, desperate to claim. No! Selena screamed back at her own soul. He is a killer! He is a king! He will lock us away! Panic overrode the pleasure. Let go! She shrieked. She yanked her arm back, but his grip was iron. He was pulling her. He was actually dragging her across the sticky bar top like she weighed nothing. Instinct took over. Selena didn't think. She didn't plan. Her hand dropped to her boot. Her fingers found the cold hilt of the silver knife. She saw his eyes, gold, burning, possessive. He looked at her like he wanted to eat her whole, like he wanted to consume her soul. Mine, he growled. The word terrified her more than any threat. Mine meant property. Mine meant cages. Mine meant the breeding programs in the north. She slashed. The silver blade flashed under the neon lights. She aimed for his hand, his arm, anything to make him let go. Slish. The knife sliced through the expensive fabric of his suit jacket. It grazed his skin. Blood. Bright, red blood welled up on the king's forearm. The silence roared. The entire club seemed to gasp. The music felt miles away. Selena froze, the bloody knife trembling in her hand. She had just cut the alpha of alphas. She had just drawn royal blood. I'm dead, she thought. I'm so dead. She waited for the blow. She waited for him to rip her throat out. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the end. Instead, she heard a sound that made her blood run cold. He chuckled. It was a dark, low, rumbling sound. Not of anger, but of amusement. Slowly, Selena opened her eyes. Malik wasn't looking at his wound. He wasn't looking at the knife. He was looking at her, and he was smiling. It was a terrifying, feral smile. His teeth were slightly elongated. "You fight," he murmured, sounding almost impressed. He lifted his bleeding arm, ignoring the silver burn that should have crippled him. "You bite." He yanked her forward. Hard. Selena went flying over the bar. She crashed into his hard chest. The smell of him, rain, ozone, and pure alpha power, drowned her. "Good," he whispered against her ear, sending shivers down her spine. "I like a fight." The floor disappeared. He scooped her up, one arm under her legs, the other around her waist. He threw her over his shoulder like a sack of grain. "Put me down!" Selena screamed, hammering her fists against his massive back. "Let me go!" "No," he said simply. She fought. She kicked. She bit his shoulder, but he just turned around and started walking. "Clear the way!" he roared to his guards. The crowd split. Selena watched the club upside down as she was carried away. She saw Tina's shocked face. She saw the spilled drinks. She saw her life, her safe, invisible, miserable life fading away. They hit the night air. The cold wind slapped her face. He marched toward a massive, black-armored SUV that was idling at the curb. "You can't do this," she sobbed, the fight draining out of her as terror took over. "You can't just take me." Malik opened the door. He tossed her onto the leather seat. He leaned in, his face inches from hers. His gold eyes were swirling with violet now. "I found you," he said, his voice rough with finality. "I'm keeping you." He slammed the door. The lock clicked. Selena scrambled to the window, pressing her hands against the glass. As the engine roared to life, she realized the truth. The perfume hadn't failed because it was cheap. It had failed because fate was cruel. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was the Alpha King's captive. And as the car sped away, driving toward the mist that separated the human world from the wolf kingdom, Selena knew one thing for certain. Her hiding was over. Her war had just begun.
The silence in the armored SUV was louder than the roaring engine. Malik gripped the leather steering wheel until his knuckles popped. In the rearview mirror, he saw her. She was huddled in the corner of the back seat, knees pulled to her chest, trembling so violently the leather seat squeaked with the vibration. She looked small. Too small to hold the power he had tasted on her skin. The air inside the car was thick, choking. The air conditioning was blasting, but it couldn't scrub away the scent. The vile synthetic rose was fading, dying under the onslaught of her true chemistry. Wild honey, winter air, and fear, bitter, acrid fear. His wolf paced inside his chest, agitated, clawing at his ribs. "Comfort her," the beast whined. "She is ours. Protect." Malik clenched his jaw. He didn't know how to comfort. He knew how to command. He knew how to kill. He knew how to break armies and silence dissent. But a terrified female huddled in his back seat. She was a variable he hadn't calculated. "Stop shaking," he growled. It was meant to be an order to calm her down. She flinched as if he had struck her. She pressed herself tighter against the door, her eyes squeezed shut, tears leaking out to wet her lashes. Irritation flared in his gut. Not at her, at himself. He stomped on the gas pedal. The SUV surged forward, the speedometer climbing past 100. The city lights faded behind them, replaced by the encroaching shadows of the deep forest. They were approaching the barrier. The asphalt road ended, turning into ancient, packed earth. Ahead, a wall of swirling, silver mist rose from the ground to the sky. To a human, it looked like a sudden fog bank. To a wolf, it was the gate between worlds. "Hold on," he warned. He drove straight into the wall of white. The pressure dropped instantly. The air inside the car crackled with ozone and old magic. The modern world, the noise, the pollution, the chaos, was stripped away. They burst through the other side. The sky was no longer choked with smog. It was a canvas of crushed velvet and diamond stars. The moon was huge, hanging low and yellow over the peaks of the Iron Mountains. Then, the surge hit him. Now that they were across the barrier, in the lands where magic breathed, her scent wasn't just a smell. It was a physical force. It hit him like a shockwave. His veins burned. His vision sharpened until he could see the individual veins in the leaves of the trees flying past. He gasped. the air rushing into his lungs like liquid fire. He felt stronger, faster, lethal. She did this, just by existing near him. He looked in the mirror again. She had opened her eyes. She was staring out the window, her mouth slightly open. The terror momentarily replaced by confusion. She saw the trees, massive redwoods that had stood for 1,000 years. She saw the lack of power lines. She saw the wildness. The kingdom, she whispered. Her voice was broken, raspy from screaming. You brought me back. I brought you home, Malik corrected. She met his eyes in the mirror. Violet collided with gold. This isn't home, she said, her voice trembling but gaining a razor-sharp edge. It's a hunting ground. And I'm the prey. Malik slammed on the brakes. The SUV skidded to a halt on the dirt path, dust billowing up around them. He turned in his seat, his arm resting on the backrest, looming over her even from the front. You are not prey, he said, his voice low, vibrating through the car. You are my mate. There is a difference. She looked at him with cold, hard hate. There is no difference to men like you, she spat. You just want the battery. You just want the silver. Malik stared at her. The accusation stung because it was true for everyone else. But for him, he didn't need her power. He was already a god of war. He wanted her. The fire in her eyes, the way she had slashed at him with a knife. He felt a surge of possessiveness so dark it frightened him. If I wanted a battery, I would have chained you in the trunk, he said coldly. We are going to the Citadel. You will eat. You will sleep. And then you sell me? She challenged. Malik's eyes narrowed. Then, he promised, turning back to the road, I will show you that you belong to me, not because of your blood, but because your soul is tied to mine. He hit the gas again. As the engine roared, he swore to himself that he would tear down the sky before he let anyone sell her.
The car didn't stop until they reached the gates of hell. The iron citadel was more imposing than any nightmare Selena had ever had. It rose from the jagged black rocks of the mountain like a dark tooth, piercing the moonlit sky. The walls were sheer obsidian, 50 feet high, topped with watchtowers where fires burned in iron braziers. It wasn't a castle. It was a fortress of war. Her eyes traced the banners hanging from the battlements. A black wolf on a field of red, the sigil of the Iron King. The SUV rumbled through the massive iron gates, which groaned open with the sound of grinding metal. The car was instantly surrounded. Wolves, dozens of them. They weren't in human form, but shifted massive beasts the size of ponies, with fur ranging from slate gray to midnight black. They circled the car, chuffing and growling, their yellow eyes glowing in the dark. Selena shrank back against the leather seat. He brought me to a pack of monsters. Malik killed the engine. The silence that followed was heavy, pressing against her ears. His door opened. He stepped out. Selena watched, paralyzed. She should run. She should try to open her door and sprint for the woods, but the circle of wolves was unbroken. They would tear her apart before she took 3 steps. Malik walked around to her side. He didn't ask. He yanked the door open. Out, he commanded. Selena didn't move. Her limbs felt like lead. He did it for her. He reached in, his large hands grabbing her waist. He hauled her out of the car like she was a rag doll. Her feet hit the dirt, but her knees gave way. She would have collapsed if he hadn't caught her, pulling her flush against his hard body. The air thickened between them. He smelled of pine and ozone and that terrifying, intoxicating musk that made her head spin. Walk, he said. I can't, she whispered. It wasn't defiance. It was truth. Her terror had drained her of everything. He made a sound of impatience, a low growl in his throat. He swept her up into his arms, carrying her bridal style. Selena stiffened. Being this close to him was torture. Her body wanted to melt into his heat, but her mind was screaming, danger, danger. He carried her up the stone steps. The wolves in the courtyard lowered their heads. They whined submissively. They weren't growling at her. They were bowing to him. They entered the great hall. It was cavernous. Stone floors, tapestries depicting bloody battles. A throne made of melted swords sat at the far end. Servants, humans, and betas stopped what they were doing and pressed themselves against the walls, eyes averted. Prepare the queen's chambers, Malik barked to a terrified woman in a maid's uniform. Queen? Selena's head snapped up. I am not a queen, she hissed. I am a prisoner. Malik looked down at her. His face was a mask of stone. You are what I say you are. He carried her up a winding staircase, his heartbeat thumping steadily against her side. It was slow, calm. How could he be calm? He had just kidnapped a woman. He kicked open a set of double doors. He walked into a room that was bigger than the entire club she worked in. A fireplace roared with flames. A bed massive enough for 5 people sat in the center, covered in furs. He dropped her onto the soft mattress. Selena scrambled backward, crab-walking until her back hit the headboard. She pulled her knees up, reaching for her boot, for the knife. But the knife was gone. He must have taken it in the car. She felt naked, defenseless. Malik stood at the foot of the bed. He loomed over her, blocking out the light from the fire. He looked at her with an intensity that burned hotter than the flames. "Stay," he ordered. One word. Absolute command. He turned on his heel and walked toward the door. He paused, his hand on the iron latch. "The scent," he said, not looking back. "The rose perfume. Wash it off. It offends me." The door slammed shut. The lock clicked. Selena was alone in the belly of the beast. She stared at the door, her chest heaving. She couldn't stop the tears now. She curled into a ball on the fur blankets that smelled like him. She wasn't safe. She wasn't hidden. She was a silver omega in the bed of the Alpha King. And he was hungry.
Malik leaned his forehead against the heavy oak of the door, listening. Inside, he heard the muffled sound of sobbing. It felt like a claw dragging down the center of his chest. Every sob was a physical blow. He hated it. He hated that he was the cause of it. He pushed off the door and paced the stone corridor. His guards stood at attention, eyes forward, pretending they didn't see their king unraveling. He needed to hit something. He needed to run. He had expected her to be grateful. He had saved her from a life of squalor, from serving drinks to drunks, from the constant fear of the north. He had brought her to the safest place on earth, but she looked at him like he was the monster. "She doesn't know you, my liege." Malik stopped pacing. He turned to look at Jarek, his beta and oldest friend. Jarek was leaning against a stone pillar, arms crossed, a sympathetic look on his scarred face. "She knows I am her mate," Malik growled. "Biology dictates she should feel the bond." "Biology is loud," Jarek agreed. "But trauma is louder. You snatched her from her life, Malik. You dragged her through the barrier. To her, you're just another warlord." Malik snarled. "I am not a warlord. I am the king. To a terrified girl, there is no difference." Malik felt a spike of shame. He rubbed a hand over his face. Jarek was right, but he didn't know how to be anything else. He was the Iron King. He broke things. He didn't fix them. "She smells like chemicals," Malik muttered, deflecting. "She covers her scent." "Smart girl," Jarek noted. If the North knew a silver omega was hiding in the city. The air in the corridor shifted. A scout came running up the stairs. He was out of breath, his armor covered in dust and mud. He smelled of hard travel and fear. Malik straightened, the emotional turmoil instantly replaced by cold, calculating leadership. "Report," Malik commanded. The scout dropped to one knee. "My king, we have a breach at the northern border." Malik's eyes narrowed. "A breach? Not an army?" "Not yet," the scout panted. "A messenger. From Alpha Kale of the north." The air thickened. Kale. The tyrant who ran the breeding camps. The man Selena had been running from. "What does he want?" Malik asked, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. The scout swallowed hard, afraid to deliver the news. He says you have stolen his property. He says his trackers picked up the scent of the silver one crossing the barrier in your vehicle." Malik felt the beast take over. His vision went red. His canines lengthened, cutting into his lower lip. "Property," Malik repeated. The word tasted like bile. "He demands you return her," the scout continued, trembling. "Or he will consider it an act of war." The temperature in the hallway seemed to drop 10 degrees. Frost began to creep along the stone walls, radiating from where Malik stood. Jarek pushed off the pillar, his hand going to his sword. "Malik?" Malik didn't look at his friend. He looked at the door to the bedroom, the door that shielded the crying woman inside. His resolve hardened into diamond. "Let him come," Malik said. His voice was no longer a growl. It was the calm before the apocalypse. "Sir?" the scout asked. "Send his messenger back with a box," Malik ordered. "Put the messenger's head inside it." Jarek's eyes went wide. "Malik, that is a declaration of total war." "No," Malik corrected, turning his gaze back to the door where his mate lay. It is a declaration of ownership. He walked away, heading toward the war room. KL wanted her back. The world wanted to use her. They had forgotten who they were dealing with. They could bring their armies. They could bring their fire. Malik would burn the entire world to ash before he let anyone touch a single hair on her head. The courting was over. The war had begun.
Sunlight hit her face like a slap. Selena gasped, bolting upright in the massive bed. For a fraction of a second, she didn't know where she was. The sheets were too soft, silk against her cheek instead of the rough cotton of her apartment. The air didn't smell like mildew and city exhaust. It smelled of wood smoke, cedar, and Kim, rain and ozone. The scent was embedded in the pillows. She had spent the night sleeping in the Alpha King's scent. The memory of the abduction crashed into her. The club, the knife, the car ride through the barrier. She scrambled backward until her spine hit the carved wooden headboard. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was still in her bartender uniform, but it felt grimy now, a second skin of dirt and stale fear. She scanned the room. It was magnificent and terrifying. The stone walls were hung with velvet drapes to keep out the mountain chill. A fire crackled in the hearth, fed by logs thick as her waist. On a table near the window, a silver tray waited. She crept toward it, her movements silent, like a mouse in a cat's den. There was food, fresh bread, cheese, fruit, and next to it, a dress. It was deep violet, made of material that looked like flowing water. A costume, she whispered to the empty room. He wants to dress up his doll. She ignored the food, even though her stomach twisted with hunger. She wouldn't eat his bread. Fairy tales taught her that much. If you eat the food of the underworld, you never leave. She moved to the heavy oak door. She pressed her ear against it. Silence. No guards breathing heavily. No clanking armor. She reached for the iron handle. Her hand trembled. She braced for the resistance of a deadbolt, expected to be sealed in like the prisoner she was. The latch clicked. The door swung open effortlessly. Selena froze. She stared at the open hallway. It was empty. This terrified her more than a padlock. A lock meant he was afraid she would escape. An open door meant he was so arrogant, so certain of his power, that he didn't believe she could leave. She stepped out into the corridor. The stone was cold beneath her boots. She needed a weapon. She needed a map. But mostly, she needed to get the smell of him out of her nose before it drove her insane.
Malik stood in the war room, staring at the map of the kingdom spread out on the obsidian table. The messenger has been dealt with, Jarek said, standing by the fire. He looked tired. Kale will have his answer by dawn. Malik nodded, his face impassive. Good. Double the patrols on the northern ridge. If Kale wants war, he will try to strike before the snows set in. Malik, Jarek warned softly. You are starting a continental war for one female. Is she worth the blood of thousands? Malik looked up. His eyes flashed gold. She is not just a female, Jarek. She is the anchor. Without her, the beast eats me alive. He turned and walked out of the war room. He couldn't explain it to a beta. They didn't understand the madness of the mating bond. It wasn't a choice. It was gravity. If she wasn't near him, he felt like his skin was being peeled off. He walked up the stairs toward the royal wing. He carried a second tray of food himself, dismissing the servant who had tried to take it. He needed to see her. He needed to prove he wasn't the monster she thought he was. He reached the bedroom door. It was ajar. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in his chest. She ran. He kicked the door open, the wood banging against the stone wall. Selena. The room was empty. The food on the table was untouched. The dress was still folded. He spun around, his wolf rising to the surface, ready to hunt. He stepped back into the hallway, sniffing the air. He caught her trail immediately. Not the chemical roses anymore that was fading. Now, it was just her. Wild honey, sharp with adrenaline. She hadn't run far. He followed the scent down the corridor, past the armory, and toward the west wing balcony. He found her standing by the stone railing, looking out over the citadel courtyard. She looked tiny against the vast backdrop of the mountains. Her shoulders were hunched, defensive. She heard him coming, of course she did, and she spun around, pressing her back against the railing. You left your room, Malik said. He tried to keep his voice soft, but it came out as a growl. He was still pumping with the adrenaline of thinking she had escaped. I'm not a dog, she snapped. Her voice shook, but her chin was high. I don't stay in a crate. Malik stopped 10 feet away. He set the tray down on a stone bench. I didn't lock the door, he pointed out. I am not your jailer, Selena. Then let me go. I can't. Won't, she corrected. You won't let me go. Malik stepped closer. She flinched. He stopped immediately, frustration boiling in his gut. Why did she look at him like he was going to strike her? He had decimated an army of rogues to keep his borders safe, yet he couldn't walk toward his own mate without terrifying her. You need to eat, he said, gesturing to the tray. You are silver. Your metabolism burns faster than a normal wolf's. If you don't eat, you will collapse. I'd rather starve than be fattened up for breeding, she said, her voice dripping with venom. Malik's hands clenched into fists at his sides. The accusation enraged him. Is that what you think? He asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You think I want to breed you like cattle? That's what alphas do, she said. Tears welled in her eyes, silver and bright. That's all we are to you. Batteries, broodmares. I am not them, Malik roared. The sound echoed off the stone walls. Selena gasped and covered her head, shrinking down. Malik froze. He saw the terror in her posture. He saw the way she braced for a blow. Shame washed over him, dousing his anger instantly. He was doing it again, ruling with fear. It was the only language he knew, and it was the one language she couldn't hear. He took a step back, then another. Eat, he said, his voice rough with regret. Or don't. But you are not leaving this citadel, not while Kale is hunting you. He turned and walked away, leaving her alone on the balcony. He had to get away from her before he broke something, or before he broke her.
He left. Selena slowly lowered her hands. Her heart was beating so fast she felt dizzy. She watched his broad back disappear around the corner. He had shouted. He had looked ready to kill something, but he hadn't touched her. The North Alpha would have backhanded her for speaking out of turn. Malik had just left. She looked at the tray of food he had left on the bench. Roast chicken, fresh berries, a goblet of water. Her stomach gave a traitorous growl. She grabbed an apple and bit into it, her eyes scanning the courtyard below. What she saw confused her. She expected to see a military camp. She expected to see slaves in chains and wolves drilling for war. Instead, she saw a city. There were pups, tiny, tumbling balls of fur chasing each other around a fountain. Mothers watched them, laughing. There were blacksmiths hammering iron, not with fear, but with rhythm. There were old wolves sitting on benches, smoking pipes in the sun. It looked peaceful. The Iron Peace, she whispered. She had heard the rumors. That Malik ruled with an iron fist, but that his people were the safest in the world. She watched a young male wolf trip and fall. An older guard, one of the terrifying elites, didn't kick him. He reached down, picked the pup up, and dusted him off. Selena lowered the apple. Her mind couldn't reconcile the two images. Malik was a monster. He had kidnapped her. He had roared at her. But his people didn't look like victims. They looked free. He's fooling you, she told herself. It's a trick, but the smell of the air wasn't a trick. It didn't smell like fear down there. It smelled of contentment. The peace shattered. Wow. A siren, deep, guttural, and bone-shaking. It echoed from the watchtowers. Below, the scene transformed instantly. The mothers grabbed their pups and ran for the stone shelters. The blacksmiths dropped their hammers and grabbed swords. The old men extinguished their pipes and moved with surprising speed toward the inner keep. It wasn't panic. It was a drill. No, not a drill. Selena gripped the stone railing, her knuckles turning white. She smelled it on the wind. It drifted over the high walls of the citadel, carried by the northern breeze. Smoke, wet dog, and something metallic. She knew that scent. She had smelled it in her nightmares for 3 years. Kale, she breathed. The North Alpha wasn't just sending messengers anymore. He was here. Malik's voice boomed from the courtyard below. He had shifted. He was a massive black wolf now, standing 10 feet tall at the shoulder, rallying his men. He looked up. Across the distance, his golden eyes locked onto hers on the balcony. He didn't growl. He didn't roar. He just looked at her with a grim, terrifying resolve. Stay, his gaze seemed to say. Then he turned and charged toward the main gates, his army flowing behind him like a river of shadow. Selena stood frozen. She had run for 3 years to escape the war. Now, she was standing in the center of it, and the monster she feared most was the only thing standing between her and the monster she was running from. She turned and ran back toward the bedroom, not to hide, but to find a weapon. If the walls fell, she wouldn't go back to the north in chains. She would go back in a body bag.
The gates of the citadel groaned open, the iron hinges shrieking against the rust. Malik walked out first. He didn't shift. Not yet. He walked out in his human skin, wearing nothing but his black combat trousers and the heavy fur cloak of his station. He wanted Kale to see his face. He wanted the North Alpha to look into the eyes of the man who was about to end his bloodline. The valley below the citadel was crawling with them. Kale's army wasn't disciplined. It was a swarm. 3,000 wolves, mangy and smelling of wet dog and greed, shifted and snapped at the air. In the center of the horde stood a massive war wagon, pulled by 6 oxen, and sitting on top, surrounded by guards, was Kale. He was a fat man, a man who had grown soft on the suffering of others. Malik stopped 10 paces from the front line. His elite guard flanked him, weapons drawn, but Malik raised a hand. "Hold." "Iron King," Kale's voice was amplified, booming across the rocky valley. "You have something of mine." Malik crossed his arms over his broad chest. The wind whipped his dark hair, carrying the scent of the enemy to his nose. It was a vile smell, sour milk and old blood. "I have nothing of yours, Kale," Malik replied. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of thunder. "Because you own nothing here, not the land, not the air, and certainly not the queen." Kale laughed. It was a wet, ugly sound. "Queen? Is that what we're calling the breeder now?" Kale sneered, leaning forward. "She is a silver omega, Malik. She belongs to the strongest. She belongs to the pack that can hold her. I broke her in. I branded her. She has used goods, but she still produces. Give her back, and I won't burn your city to the ground." The beast inside Malik slammed against his ribcage, demanding release. The idea of this man touching Selena, branding her, breaking her, turned Malik's vision crimson. He took a step forward. The ground beneath his boot cracked. "You think you can take her?" Malik asked, his voice dropping to a whisper that terrified the front line of Kale's wolves. "I have 3,000 soldiers," Kale gloated. "You have a few hundred guards. Do the math, Iron King." Malik smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile the reaper wears when he sees a harvest. "I did the math," Malik said. "You brought 3,000 men to die." He let the cloak drop from his shoulders. "Kill them all," Malik commanded. "But leave the fat one for me." Then, he shifted. It wasn't a smooth transition. It was a violent reconfiguration of matter. Bones rearranged with a sickening crunch. Muscles expanded, tearing through his human skin until midnight black fur erupted. In seconds, the man was gone. In his place stood the alpha of alphas, a wolf the size of a nightmare, with eyes of burning gold. He didn't wait for his army. He launched himself into the air, a black missile aiming straight for the war wagon.
From the balcony, it looked like the ocean crashing against a cliff. Selena gripped the cold stone railing, her knuckles white. The wind tore at her hair, whipping strands across her face, but she didn't blink. She couldn't. She watched the black tide of Malik's army collide with the gray mass of the north. She expected him to stay back. That's what alphas did. They sat on their thrones or in their command tents and sent the betas to die. They treated war like a chess game where the pawns were disposable. But Malik wasn't in the back. She saw the massive black wolf he was, twice the size of any other shifter on the field, tear through the front lines. He was a blur of violence. He didn't stop to fight individual soldiers. He plowed through them, tossing fully grown wolves into the air like rag dolls. He was heading straight for Kale. "He's insane," Selena whispered, the knife in her hand forgotten. "He's going to get himself killed." A wave of archers from the north unleashed a volley. Arrows rained down on the battlefield. Selena gasped. She watched an arrow strike the black wolf's shoulder. Another hit his flank. He didn't slow down. If anything, he sped up. He reached the war wagon. Kale's personal guards swarmed him, stabbing with spears and silver-tipped pikes. Selena's breath hitched. "He's fighting for me." The thought hit her harder than the wind. Kale had offered peace in exchange for her return. Malik had chosen war. He was bleeding down there, taking silver into his flesh, because he refused to hand her over. For 3 years, She had believed she was nothing but currency. A thing to be bought, sold, or stolen. But you don't die for currency. You spend it. Malik was dying for her. Below, the black wolf leaped. He cleared the guards, his jaws snapping shut around Kale's throat. The North Alpha didn't even have time to scream. Malik ripped him off the wagon and shook him like a terrier shakes a rat. The Northern Army froze. They watched their leader fall. Malik stood on top of the wagon, blood dripping from his muzzle, arrows sticking out of his back. He threw his head back and howled. It was a sound of absolute victory, a sound that vibrated in Selena's bones. The Northern wolves dropped their weapons. They didn't run. They fell to their knees. When an alpha is killed in single combat, his pack is forfeit. Malik had won. He looked up toward the citadel. Even from this distance, Selena felt the weight of his gaze. He wasn't looking at his soldiers. He was checking the balcony. He was checking to see if she was still there. Selena slowly lowered the knife. Her hand went to her chest, right over her heart. It was pounding, not with fear, but with something else, something terrifyingly close to hope.
Pain was a distant information signal. Malik shifted back to human form in the mud of the courtyard. His body screamed. The silver arrowheads were still embedded in his shoulder and thigh, burning like hot coals. His healing factor was fighting the silver poison, but it was slow. He staggered. "My king." Jarek was there instantly, grabbing his arm to support him. "The healers are on the way." Malik shook him off. "I'm fine." He wasn't fine. He was dizzy. The world was tilting at the edges, but he had to get to her. He had to make sure she understood that Kale was dead, that the threat was gone. He limped through the great hall, trailing blood and mud on the pristine stone floors. Servants gasped and scattered, but he ignored them. He climbed the stairs, leaving a bloody handprint on the wall for balance. He reached the bedroom door. It was still open. He stumbled inside. Selena. She was there. She wasn't hiding under the bed. She wasn't holding a weapon. She was standing by the fire, holding a basin of steaming water and a stack of white linens. Malik stopped, swaying on his feet. He blinked, trying to clear the black spots from his vision. "You stayed," he rasped. His voice was wrecked from the howl. Selena looked at him. Her eyes were wide, taking in the blood, the arrows, the ruin of his body. "Sit down," she said. Her voice was steady, steadier than his. "I killed him," Malik said, needing her to know. "Kale. He's dead. He can't touch you." "I saw," she said softly. "Sit down, Malik, before you fall down." He obeyed because his legs gave out. He sat heavily on the edge of the bed. Selena moved closer. She smelled of wild honey, but the fear was gone. It was replaced by a sharp, clinical focus. "This is going to hurt," she warned. She reached for the arrow in his shoulder. "I've had worse," he grunted. She gripped the shaft. With a quick, precise movement, she yanked it out. Malik hissed, his head falling back. "Pff." She immediately pressed a hot, wet cloth to the wound. The steam mingled with the smell of copper blood. "Why?" she asked quietly. Malik opened one eye to look at her. She was focused on cleaning the wound, her hands gentle but firm. "Why what?" "You could have just given me back," she said. She didn't look at his face. "You could have saved your men. You could have saved yourself the pain. Why take the arrows?" Malik reached out. His hand, stained with the blood of her enemy, covered hers. She froze, but she didn't pull away. "Because," Malik said, his thumb brushing the soft skin of her wrist. "You are not currency, Selena. You are my queen. And a king protects his queen." Selena looked up then. Her violet eyes searched his face, looking for the lie, looking for the trick. She didn't find one. "I'm not your queen," she whispered, but the venom was gone. "I'm just a bartender." "Not anymore," Malik murmured. The moment hung between them, fragile as glass. He leaned in, just an inch. He wanted to kiss her. He wanted to taste the honey on her lips. The door burst open. Jarek stood there, his face pale. He held a scroll with a heavy wax seal. "Malik," Jarek said, breathless. "We have a problem." Malik didn't look away from Selena. "Unless the citadel is on fire, get out." "It's the Grand Council," Jarek said, stepping into the room. "They saw the battle. They saw the silver flash when you killed Kale. They know about her." Selena stiffened under Malik's hand. The fear came rushing back, flooding her scent. "They have summoned the 5 armies," Jarek continued, his voice grim. They are demanding you hand over the superweapon to be shared by the council, or they will erase the Iron Citadel from the map. Malik felt Selena's hand turn cold in his. He looked at Jarek. Then he looked back at Selena. Let them come, Malik said. But this time, he felt the weight of the world settling on his shoulders. He had killed one wolf to keep her. Now, he would have to kill the world.
Steam rose from the copper tub, thick and curling like white smoke. Selena stood naked in front of the tall mirror in the bathing chamber. For the first time in 3 years, she didn't reach for the bottle of synthetic rose. It sat on the vanity, catching the flickering candlelight. It looked harmless now, just a glass bottle. But she knew it was a cage she had built for herself. She looked at her reflection. The bruises from the abduction were fading to yellow. Her hair was wild, tangled from the wind on the balcony. No more, she whispered. She stepped into the scalding water. It stung her skin, but it was a clean pain. She grabbed a rough sponge and a bar of soap that smelled of sandalwood. She scrubbed. She scrubbed at her neck, her wrists, behind her ears. She scrubbed until her skin turned pink and raw. She wasn't just washing off the grime of the battle. She was washing off the mask. She was scrubbing away the bartender, the victim, the nobody. The water turned gray with dirt and the oily residue of the chemical perfume. When she finally stood up, water sluicing down her body, the air in the room changed. Without the chemical barrier, her true scent bloomed. It filled the humid bathroom instantly. Wild honey, rich and sweet. Winter air, crisp and biting. It was the scent of a queen. It was the scent of power. She wrapped herself in the violet silk robe Malik had left for her. It felt heavy, substantial. She walked back into the bedroom. Malik wasn't there. He had gone to the war room hours ago, limping but refusing to rest. Selena moved to the window. Below, in the courtyard, the atmosphere had shifted. The peace of the Iron Citadel was gone. Soldiers were running. Blacksmiths were sharpening swords by the hundreds. The air tasted of metallic fear. The council was coming. 5 armies against 1 fortress. A normal wolf would run. A survivor would flee out the back gate while the king was distracted. Selena turned away from the window. Malik had taken an arrow for her. He had started a war for her. He hadn't asked her to hide. He had asked her to stand. She tightened the belt of her robe. She wasn't running. If he was going to face the world for her, she would face him with nothing to hide. She opened the door and stepped into the corridor, following the scent of ozone and blood down to the heart of the fortress.
The war room was a tomb of silence. Malik stood at the head of the obsidian table. His shoulder throbbed where the arrow had been, a dull, rhythmic ache that kept him sharp. Around the table sat his council of elders. 5 men, old and gray, with eyes that darted nervously to the maps spread out before them. It is suicide, Elder Thorn hissed, slamming his withered hand on the table. 5 kings, Malik, 50,000 soldiers. We have, at best, 5,000. The math does not work. We have the high ground, Malik said, his voice a low rumble. The citadel has never been breached. It has never been besieged by the entire Grand Council. Thorn countered. They have siege engines. They have sorcerers. And why? Because you refuse to share the asset. Malik's head snapped up, his gold eyes narrowed into slits. The asset, Malik repeated, his voice dangerously soft. She has a name. She is a Silver Omega, Thorn shouted, losing his composure. She is a weapon of mass destruction, and you are hoarding her like a dragon hoards gold. That is why they are coming. Give her to the council. Let them share the bloodline. They will leave us in peace. The room went deadly still. Even the fire seemed to stop crackling. Malik slowly walked around the table. His boots clicked on the stone floor. He stopped behind Thorn. You want me to hand my mate to a gang of rapists to buy your safety? Malik asked. I want to save the pack, Thorn whispered, sweating. The Iron Piece is built on strength, not sentimentality. You are dooming us all for one female. Malik leaned down. If I give her up, I am not a king, I am a pimp. He straightened, addressing the room. We fight. If the council wants her, they will have to climb over a mountain of their own dead to get to her. Dismissed. The elders stood. They bowed, but their eyes were hard, resentful. They looked at Malik not with reverence, but with the calculation of men watching a leader go mad. They filed out of the room. Malik stayed. He stared at the map, at the red markers closing in on his home from every direction. He felt a presence at the door. He didn't need to turn around. The scent hit him like a physical caress. Honey and cold air. Pure. Unmasked. He turned. Selena stood in the doorway. She was wearing the violet silk, her hair damp and loose around her shoulders. She wasn't trembling. She wasn't hiding. Malik felt the breath leave his lungs. She was the most beautiful, terrifying thing he had ever seen. "You washed," he said, his voice rough. "I did," she answered. She walked into the room, moving toward him. She stopped a foot away. "I heard them. The elders." Malik stiffened. "They are old men. They are afraid. They are right," she said. Malik's heart stopped. "Selena, they are right that the odds are impossible," she continued. She reached out. Her hand, small and pale, took his large, scarred hand. "But they are wrong about you." She looked up at him, her violet eyes clear. "You aren't hoarding a weapon," she whispered. "You're protecting your wife." Malik made a sound in his throat, half growl, half sob. He pulled her into him, burying his face in her damp hair. He inhaled deeply, filling his lungs with her scent. The beast inside him settled, purring with a contentment that vibrated through his chest. "I will not let them take you," he swore against her neck. "I will burn the world first." "I know," she said, and for the first time, she hugged him back.
Malik had to return to the walls to inspect the defenses. Selena returned to her chambers. She sat by the fire, combing her hair. The fear was still there, lurking in the corners of her mind, but it was quieter now. She had chosen a side. A knock came at the door. "Come in," she called. The door opened. It wasn't Malik. It was Thorn, the elder she had heard arguing in the war room. He was followed by 2 guards she didn't recognize. They held silver spears. Selena stood up slowly, the comb dropping from her hand. "Elder Thorn," she said, keeping her voice steady. "The king is on the ramparts." "We know where the king is," Thorn said. His voice was sad, but his eyes were cold flint. "He is blinding himself with lust. He is leading the pack to slaughter." Selena took a step back. "Get out." Thorn shook his head. "I cannot do that, child. The council has offered a deal. If we deliver you to their camp before dawn, the armies will disperse. The citadel will be spared." Selena's blood ran cold. "Malik will kill you." "Malik will thank me," Thorn said, though he didn't look like he believed it. "When the fever of the bond breaks, he will realize I saved his kingdom." He signaled to the guards. Selena didn't wait. She grabbed the heavy iron poker from the fireplace. "Don't touch me!" she screamed. Thorn sighed. He pulled a small dart gun from his robe. Selena felt a sharp sting in her neck. She reached up, pulling out a small feather-tipped dart. She stared at it, her vision already swimming. "Wolfsbane," she slurred. The iron poker fell from her hand, clanging loudly against the stone. "You traitor!" "For the good of the pack," Thorn whispered. The floor rushed up to meet her. Her knees hit the stone. Then her shoulder. She tried to crawl toward the door, tried to open her mouth to scream for Malik, but her tongue felt like lead. Blackness crept into the edges of her vision. The last thing she saw was Thorn standing over her, looking down with pity. The last thing she heard was the sound of her own heart slowing down, and the terrible realization that she wasn't going to be there when Malik came back. She was the price of peace, and the elders had just paid it. Consciousness returned like a hammer to the skull. Selena groaned, the sound scraping against her dry throat. Her head throbbed with the chemical hangover of wolfsbane, a dull, rhythmic pounding behind her eyes. She tried to reach for her head, but her hands stopped short. Clink! She froze. She opened her eyes. She wasn't in the soft bed with the fur throws. She wasn't in the warm, ozone-scented air of the citadel. She was in a cage. It was a transport cage, the kind used for large dogs or dangerous animals. Steel bars, cold and rusted, pressed against her sides. The floor was metal mesh that bit into her knees. The cage was sitting in the middle of a massive tent. The canvas walls flapped in the wind, sounding like the wings of giant bats. "She wakes," a voice rumbled. Selena scrambled back until her spine hit the bars. She looked up. 5 men sat on high-backed chairs arranged in a semicircle. They wore furs and crowns of gold, iron, and bone. They held goblets of wine and looked at her not with lust, but with the cold, calculating greed of bankers assessing a pile of gold. The Council of 5 Kings. The Iron King's pet? One of them sneered, a man with a scar running through his white eye. He didn't fight very hard to keep you, did he? His own elders delivered you like a sacrificial lamb. Laughter rippled through the tent. Selena felt the blood drain from her face. It was true. Malik hadn't come. The pack had betrayed him, and by extension, they had sold her. Where is he? Selena whispered. Where is Malik? Probably crying in his tower, the white-eyed king said. We offered him a deal. Give us the silver omega, and we spare his pitiful fortress. His elders were smart enough to take it. He stood up and walked toward the cage. He reached through the bars, his fingers brushing her cheek. Selena flinched, snapping her teeth at him. He pulled back, laughing. Feisty. Good. Strong stock produces strong pups. We will take turns, of course, to keep the balance of power. Selena felt bile rise in her throat. The nightmare was real. The iron piece was a lie. Malik was just a memory. She curled into a ball in the center of the cage, closing her eyes. She refused to cry in front of them. She refused to give them the satisfaction. But inside, the small flame of hope that had started to burn in the citadel flickered and died. She was just a battery again.
The bedroom was silent. It wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of a grave. Malik stood in the center of the room. The fire had burned down to embers. The violet robe she had been wearing lay in a heap on the floor, looking like a pool of spilled ink. He didn't need to look for a note. He didn't need to question the guards. The scent told him the whole story. Fear, wolfsbane, and the sour, rotting smell of elder thorn. Betrayal. It hit him in the chest, physically staggering him. He grabbed the bedpost to keep from falling. It wasn't just that she was gone. It was that his own people, the wolves he had bled for, the wolves he had built this fortress to protect, had dragged her out of his home like garbage. Malik, Jarek stood in the doorway. He looked pale. He held a piece of parchment. Thorn sent a message to the council. He says the trade is complete. The armies are preparing to withdraw. Malik didn't answer. He looked at his hands. They were shaking, not with fear, with a rage so absolute, so consuming, that it felt like his blood was boiling into steam. The logic in his brain snapped. The king died in that moment. The strategist, the protector, the leader, they all evaporated. Only the monster remained. Get out, Malik whispered. Malik, we need to secure the gates, Jarek said urgently. If they decide to attack anyway. I said get out. Malik grabbed the heavy oak dresser and threw it. It smashed against the wall, splintering into kindling. Jarek stepped back, eyes wide. He had seen Malik angry. He had never seen him broken. Malik walked to the window. He looked out at the valley. Far below, miles away, he saw the torches of the 5 armies. A sea of fire in the darkness. They had her. They were down there, laughing, drinking, touching what belonged to him. He didn't shift. He didn't put on armor. He didn't grab a sword. He climbed onto the window ledge. Malik, don't, Jarek screamed, running forward. You can't face them alone. There are 50,000 of them. Malik looked back at his friend. His eyes weren't gold anymore. They were black pits. I'm not going to face them, Jarek, Malik said, his voice devoid of all humanity. I'm going to punish them. He jumped. He fell 3 stories, landing in the courtyard in a crouch that cracked the flagstones. He ignored the shock to his legs. He stood up and walked toward the main gates. The guards saw him coming. They saw the look on his face. They didn't salute. They ran. They scrambled to open the gates, terrified to be in his path. Malik walked out of the citadel. He walked down the winding mountain road. He walked toward the sea of torches. He didn't run. He walked with the slow, inevitable cadence of death itself.
The noise started as a ripple. It grew into a wave. Inside the command tent, the 5 kings stopped drinking. They looked toward the entrance flaps. Outside, the sounds of celebration, the shouting, the music were dying out. They were replaced by confused murmurs. Then, screams. What is happening? The white-eyed king demanded. A soldier burst into the tent. He was covered in blood, his eyes wide with madness. He's here, the soldier screamed. The Iron King, he's here. The army? A king asked, reaching for his sword. No, the soldier sobbed. Just him. Just him. Selena's head snapped up. The kings rushed out of the tent. Selena scrambled to the front of her cage, gripping the bars. Through the open flap, she had a view of the valley floor. It was a massacre. 1 black wolf. One single point of darkness in a sea of gray and brown. He was massive, towering over the enemy soldiers. But he wasn't fighting like a soldier. He was fighting like a natural disaster. He tore through the lines. He didn't block. He took the hits. Spears drove into his flanks. Swords slashed his chest. He didn't stop. He didn't slow down. He ripped throats out with a savagery that made the enemy recoil. Selena watched, her hands covering her mouth. He wasn't trying to rescue her. He wasn't trying to win the battle. He was committing suicide. He was letting them cut him to pieces, just so he could take as many of them with him as possible. He had lost her, and now he was throwing his life away because he couldn't live in a world where he had failed her. "No," she whispered. Tears streamed down her face, hot and fast. "Malik, no. Stop. Please stop." The sheer numbers began to tell. The black wolf stumbled. A dozen spears pierced his back. He went down on one knee. He roared a sound of pure heartbreak that shook the ground and snapped the spears, standing up again. But he was slower now. He was bleeding from 100 wounds. The sea of enemies surged forward, sensing the end of the predator. They were burying him. "Look at him," the white-eyed king laughed, standing just outside the tent. The great alpha of alphas, dying like a dog in the dirt. Selena looked at the king. Then she looked at the carnage below. Something inside her snapped. It wasn't a bone. It was the chain that held her fear. She looked at the lock on the cage. It was a simple iron latch, meant to hold a beast, not a woman with opposable thumbs. She reached up and pulled a long, sharp pin from her tangled hair. She had used it to pin back her hair before the elders arrived, a small vanity that might now save her life. Her violet dress was torn, her feet were bare, but her hands were steady. She wasn't a battery. She wasn't a victim. She was the mate of the Iron King, and he was dying alone. She jammed the pin into the lock. She twisted. Click. The door swung open. Selena stepped out. She saw a discarded sword on a table near the entrance. She grabbed it. It was heavy, too heavy for her, but she dragged it with 2 hands. She walked out of the tent. The kings were too distracted watching the slaughter to notice the girl in the violet dress. Selena took a breath. She smelled the blood. She smelled the death. She didn't run away. She didn't hide. She screamed. A primal, ear-splitting scream of rage that cut through the noise of the battlefield. And then, she ran. Not away from the monsters, but straight into the center of the storm. The battlefield was a meat grinder. Selena's bare feet sank into mud that was slick with oil and blood. The air screamed. Metal clashed against metal, wolves snarled, and dying men called for their mothers. She gripped the heavy sword with both hands, the rough leather hilt biting into her palms. She dragged it through the sludge, her breath tearing at her throat. Forward, toward the black mass in the center of the valley. A soldier from the Northern Army stepped into her path. He was huge, holding a pike, his face smeared with war paint. He blinked, stunned to see a woman in a torn violet silk dress running through the slaughter. "The Omega?" he grunted, lowering his weapon. "You're supposed to be—" Selena didn't let him finish. She swung the heavy sword with a scream of effort. The blade connected with the side of his knee. Bone crunched. The soldier howled and went down. Selena didn't stop to finish him. She scrambled over his writhing body, abandoning the heavy weapon. It was slowing her down. "Malik!" Her voice was lost in the cacophony. She was panting, her lungs burning as if she had inhaled fire. The silver blood in her veins was surging, pumping adrenaline that made the world slow down. She dodged a swinging axe. She ducked under a horse's hooves. Then she saw him. He was 50 yards away. The massive black wolf was no longer standing. He was on his belly, his fur matted with mud and crimson. A forest of spears stuck out of his back. A circle of enemy soldiers had formed around him, keeping their distance, poking at him with long pikes like children tormenting a dying bear. They were laughing. The sound of their laughter tore something open in Selena's chest. It wasn't fear anymore. It was a cold, white-hot fury that eclipsed anything she had ever felt. She reached into her dress, tearing the silk skirt up to her thighs to free her legs. She sprinted.
Darkness was creeping in at the edges of his vision. Malik lay in the mud. He couldn't feel his back legs anymore. The pain had peaked 10 minutes ago, white and blinding, and now it was fading into a numb, cold, heavy weight. He tried to lift his head. It felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. He growled, but it came out as a wet rattle. Blood bubbles popped on his muzzle. So this is it, he thought. The beast inside him was quiet, curled up to die. He looked at the boots of the soldiers surrounding him. He smelled their fear and their triumph. They had taken down the Iron King. They would sing songs about this. He closed his eyes. He tried to summon an image of her face. Violet eyes, dark hair, the way she had looked in the bath, clean and claiming him. I failed you, he thought, the guilt sharper than the spears. I promised to burn the world, and I only burned myself. Get back, get away from him. The voice cut through the fog of death. Malik's ear twitched. He knew that voice. It was the voice that haunted his dreams, but it couldn't be real. She was in a cage. She was safe, or as safe as a prisoner could be. I said move. The soldiers in front of him parted, not out of respect, but out of confusion. Malik forced his eyes open. She was there. She was a ruin in violet silk. Her dress was ripped, stained with mud up to her waist. Her feet were bleeding. Her hair was a wild halo around her face. She threw herself into the center of the circle. She stood between his broken nose and the wall of pikes, spreading her arms wide. Don't you touch him, she screamed. Do not touch him. Malik tried to whimper. Run, he wanted to say. Run, little wolf. They will hurt you. But he couldn't speak. He could only watch as she defied an army for him. The white-eyed king pushed through the line of soldiers. He looked at Selena, then at the dying wolf. He smirked. How romantic, the king said, raising a heavy iron mace. You escaped the cage to die with your pet. Very well. We can breed the next silver one from your corpse, just as easily. He raised the mace. Selena didn't flinch. She turned her back on the king. She dropped to her knees in the mud, right in front of Malik's face. She grabbed his massive, furry head with both hands. She pressed her forehead against his wet snout. You don't get to die, she whispered fiercely. Do you hear me, Malik? You don't get to leave me here alone. Malik huffed a breath, his tongue lolling out. He was too far gone. The cold was in his heart now. I choose you, she said. It wasn't a plea. It was a command. She tilted her head. She opened her mouth. Malik felt her teeth small, human, blunt compared to his press against the sensitive fur of his neck, right over the jugular. No, he thought. The bond will kill you. I am too weak to complete it. She bit down.
She tasted copper and rain. Selena clamped her jaw shut, sinking her teeth into the thick muscle of his neck. She didn't know what she was doing. She only knew the stories. The legends of the Silver Omega. The amplifier. She poured everything she had into the bite. Her fear, her rage, her love. She imagined her own life force, her own silver energy, flowing out of her body and into his. Take it, she screamed internally. Take it all. For a second, nothing happened. The white-eyed king laughed, stepping closer to swing the mace. Then, the world turned white. A shockwave exploded from the point of contact. It wasn't sound. It was pure energy. It blasted outward, knocking Selena backward into the mud. The soldiers standing in the inner circle didn't just fall. They were thrown. The white-eyed king flew 20 feet through the air, his mace spinning away. Selena pushed herself up on her elbows, gasping. The air tasted of ozone so thick it burned her tongue. She looked at Malik. The spears in his back were shaking. A violet light began to pulse beneath his black fur. It started at his neck, where she had bitten him, and raced down his spine like lightning. Snap. The wood of the spears shattered. The iron heads were pushed out of his flesh by muscle knitting together at impossible speeds. The wounds closed. The blood vanished, absorbed back into the skin. Malik stood up. He didn't stagger. He rose like a mountain. He shook his body, sending a spray of mud and broken wood flying. When he looked at her, his eyes were no longer gold. They were violet, glowing, electric, terrifying violet. He threw back his head and howled. This wasn't the howl of a dying wolf. It was the sound of a god waking up. The sound cracked the air, shattering the glass lamps in the distant tents. The ground shook. Selena scrambled back, eyes wide. He looked down at her. The violet fire in his eyes softened for a fraction of a second. He nudged her cheek with his nose, a gentle, possessive touch. Mine, his voice echoed in her head. Not spoken, felt. The telepathic bond had snapped into place. Then he turned to face the army. The white-eyed king scrambled to his feet, clutching his chest. Kill it! Kill the abomination! Malik didn't wait. He didn't run. He blurred. He moved so fast Selena couldn't track him. 1 second he was in front of her. The next, he was standing over the white-eyed king. There was a wet tear, a scream that was cut short. Malik tossed the king's body aside like a rag. He turned to the remaining 4 armies. He bared his teeth, and violet lightning arched between his canines. The hunters had become the prey, and the Iron King was finally off the leash.
Power usually felt like a weight. This felt like flight. Malik moved through the battlefield, but his feet barely touched the mud. The violet energy coursing through his veins. Selena's energy rewrote the laws of physics. He was faster than thought. He was stronger than steel. He didn't need to slaughter them. He realized that as he stood over the broken formation of the Eastern Army, he didn't need to kill 50,000 wolves to win. He just needed to be a god. He stopped in the center of the chaos. The soldiers closest to him scrambled back, dropping their swords, their eyes wide with religious terror. They looked at the violet lightning crackling along his fur. They looked at the way his wounds had vanished without a scar. Malik inhaled. He smelled Selena on the wind safe, watching him, her heart beating in sync with his. He threw his head back. He didn't howl this time. He released a pulse. It was a shockwave of pure alpha dominance, amplified by the silver blood. It rolled out from him, distorting the air like heat haze. It hit the armies like a physical wall. Wolves dropped to their knees, not by choice. Their instincts simply collapsed under the weight of his presence. The fighting stopped. The clashing of steel died instantly. Silence fell over the valley. Malik turned slowly. He looked at the 4 remaining kings. They were huddled near their command tents, their crowns looking like cheap toys now. Shift. The command echoed in their heads. Malik hadn't spoken it aloud. He had projected it. The 4 kings trembled. They looked at each other, then at the monster standing in the mud. Slowly, painfully, they shifted. They took their human forms, falling to their knees in the dirt, heads bowed low. It was finished. Malik felt the rage drain away, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. He turned his back on the surrendered armies. They were irrelevant now. He walked back toward the spot where he had almost died. She was standing there. The violet dress was ruined. Her face was streaked with mud and tears, but she stood tall. She didn't cower as the massive black wolf approached her. She reached out a hand. Malik closed his eyes. He let the beast recede. He let the bones shift and crunch, the fur retracting, the man returning. He stood before her, naked, bloody, and exhausted. The violet light faded from his eyes, leaving them gold again, but brighter than before. He didn't care about the watching armies. He dropped to his knees in front of her. He wrapped his arms around her waist and pressed his face into her stomach. "You saved me," he thought, sending the words down the bond. "I chose you," she answered.
The walk back to the citadel was a blur. Selena didn't walk. Malik refused to let her. Even though he had just fought a war, he carried her. He wrapped her in his own fur cloak, shielding her from the stares of the 50,000 soldiers who were now marching behind them not as conquerors, but as prisoners of war. They entered the gates of the Iron Citadel. The people, the blacksmiths, the mothers, the betas, came out of the shelters. They saw their king, covered in blood but alive. They saw the woman in his arms. They didn't cheer. It was too heavy for cheering. They bowed. A silent wave of reverence that rippled through the courtyard. Malik carried her straight to the Great Hall. He didn't stop at the infirmary. He didn't stop at the kitchens. He walked up the steps to the throne of melted swords. He sat down, pulling her into his lap. "Malik," she whispered, tracing the healed skin over his heart. "You need to rest." "I am resting," he murmured, burying his nose in her neck. Jarek entered the hall. He looked terrified and relieved all at once. He stopped at the foot of the throne, looking at the couple. "My king," Jarek said softly. "The 4 kings are in chains in the courtyard. The armies have surrendered their weapons. They are waiting for your judgment." Malik looked up. His face was hard. The Iron King returning. "Execute the commanders who ordered the attack," Malik said calmly. "Send the soldiers home to their families. Tell them that the era of the 5 councils is over." "And the kings?" Jarek asked. Malik looked at Selena. He waited. Selena looked at the man holding her. She thought about the cage. She thought about the fear that had ruled her life for 3 years. She thought about the North Alpha and the breeding camps. Strip them of their titles. Selena said, her voice ringing clear in the hall. Let them live as Omegas. Let them serve the packs they tried to destroy. Malik smiled. It was a vicious, proud smile. You heard the queen, Malik told Jarek. Make it so. Jarek bowed low. Long live the queen. Selena leaned back against Malik's chest. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her bone-tired. She closed her eyes. She smelled the blood on him, yes, but underneath it, she smelled rain and ozone. And for the first time in her life, she didn't smell the perfume. She smelled herself. And she loved it.